All right. So last week, we mentioned this as the good news that happened last week in terms of the outdoors and fishing, etc. So I thought I'd get, hey, someone who would know a lot more than the rest of us, and that's Shane Bonnot, Advocacy Director for the Texas CCA, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So, Shane, I won't keep you long here, but there's some important stuff going on. And I saw that email, that note that you sent, 4.4, I believe, and change $1 million developed for, donated and raised for, among other things, the buyback program, which we talked about last week on the podcast, the oyster license buyback program. But what else and what exactly happened here, and what are you going to do with this money? What are you going to earmark?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, John. Yeah. So the board dedicated a little over $4.4 million to conservation efforts across the coast. As y'all discussed, some of that's going into this innovative buyback program, which is rolling out right now. And so we put $1 million towards that effort. Now, total collectively, that effort's going to require this initial go around. It's going to require about $4.5 million. So there's other philanthropic dollars coming in from donors, but CCA is putting $1 million to that effort. And so that's 1 million of that 4.4. And then there's 2 million going into oyster reef restoration, 1 million going into Karankawa Bay, and another $1 million going into Ayers Bay, which is a part of that 3-bay Mesquite Bay closure that occurred a couple of years ago, closure from oystering. So we're trying to get back in there and restore some of those reefs. So we got $2 million going into oyster reef restoration. And then the rest of it, some of it's going to shoreline stabilization. And I've got a note here. I'll just mention what they are. So $588,000 going into tarpon tagging efforts by the Gulf Research Institute for Highly Migratory Species at A&M Galveston. Another $101,000 going into the citizen tagging program we have with Heart Research Institute out of A&M Corpus Christi. And then $50,000 going to Heart Research Institute for to help quantify the illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing that goes on in the northwestern Gulf of America by the illegal Mexican fishery. $125,000 going into some oyster education efforts down near Corpus through the Texas Surf Conservancy. $24,000 going to our annual seagrass billboards that we do with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and then as I just mentioned, about $550,000 going into shoreline restoration projects. One in Nueces Bay, one in East Galveston Bay, and then another in West Galveston Bay. Those familiar with West Galveston Bay have seen this project. That's the one that's protecting Oyster Lake from the that western end of West Galveston Bay, just above Mud Cut. So all in all, it comes out to $4,458,000, and we're just very happy that our board approved these funds and gracious and appreciative of our members for all of the work that they do through their fundraising efforts to come up with this money so that we can put it to work across the Texas coast.
Man, that's all incredible. I mean, it's all, and we were talking about it last week. I'm sure you heard, a good start. But I am curious, for our purposes, for our listeners, the fishermen that are listening to the Bite Me podcast across the country, the oyster buyback program and the oyster restoration seems to be the one that is really piquing their interest. The first thing is, has there been any reception yet to the buyback program, and what has it been?
Well, there hasn't been a reception yet, just because the letters were just mailed here a few days ago, right on Friday of last week. So almost a week ago, as the point of the time of this conversation we're having, the letters went out, and there'll be a 75-day time period in which the recipients of the letters have the opportunity to respond. Parks and Wildlife will be putting out a press release that sort of explains all of this at some point in time, and they'll hold public meetings one of them should be virtual. So, pretty much anyone can log in and listen to that public meeting and learn more about the program through Parks and Wildlife. And so we'll see what the feedback is, amongst oyster industry members that I'm privy to and have had conversations with, and some of the working groups I'm involved with. It's a mixed reaction. Some think it's going to be very successful, and some don't. I think a large function of the success of it is going to depend on the status of their vessels.
Yeah.
The condition their vessels are in, the size of their vessels, whether their vessels are in the water or already dry docked. There's a lot that they're going to have to be deciding on if this is a good time to go ahead and get out of the fishery.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. What about the restoration project? How do you see that being implemented?
Well, the piece in Ayers Bay is going to be an ongoing deal, and it's really a smaller part of a large scale restoration project that's going to be occurring in that complex. Restoration's expensive business, and we're in it for the long haul. But the more we can do to conserve these reefs and keep them from being compromised from dredging, the better off we are, because the less we'll have to restore. It's a lot more cost effective just to take care of the reefs than it is to restore them. The one in Karankawa hasn't started yet, and will start, hopefully next year, maybe at the end of this year, but probably next year. And, that's another one of those bays that we got closed to oystering. That one was closed in 2017. Used to be a very productive oyster area, and we're hoping to get some of those reefs back. The location of this project in Karankawa is, if you look at oyster habitat suitability indices, it's a really good spot. It's going to be able to grow and recruit oysters very well. So we're excited to be working on this project with the Matagorda Bay Foundation and Mr. Bill Balboa and his outfit with MBF, and they're doing a lot of good work in the Matagorda Bay area. We couldn't be more proud to be associated with them.
And one of the things that we speculated upon last week, and I did that Aggie math real quick, and I said, let's say it's 150 out of 546, I think is the number that we saw anyway. That's 25%. 25% fewer boats on the water, fewer licenses out there. Long term, short term, what are your projections? Do you have any data that would maybe tell our listeners something?
Well, active boats or individuals reporting landings from year to year varies depending on how many areas are open. Right now we have three productive areas open: 2 in Aransas, and TX-18, which is Lavaca Keller Bay, is open. So if participants vary year to year, sometimes you could have 300 to 400 licenses actually fishing. Other years you may just have a couple of hundred fishing. So it's highly influenced by what's available to fish. So when you look at that number that's being thrown around, 150, would it make a difference? Next year, likely not, but you have to start somewhere. There's always going to be this certain amount of latent licenses or licenses that aren't being fished that you're going to have to eat through first. Then you can start getting into the ones that are actually fishing. And what you're also seeing occurring in the fishery is consolidation of these licenses. They're being transferred within the industry themselves. And so there's not a whole lot of single oyster license holders in the fishery anymore. Most of them have 2 or 3. Many of them have more than 5 licenses. So those with multiple licenses might go ahead and end up giving up 1 or 2, and then they still have some that they can fish with. But this is a long-term program, and this is just one bite out of the proverbial apple.
Yeah, and then the other thing is, I'd like for you to give some shout outs here, because it's a lot of money that came about, and I know a lot of it is membership. How else did this come about? And then, of course, what can our listeners do?
Sure. Well, our piece came from fundraising through our memberships and donations through our memberships. The other monies that are coming into the buyback program are going. Some are coming with some fundraising efforts through Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, and other members of CCA and groups like Flats Worthy. They're all coming together to donate money. Some of the money is coming from former Texas Parks and Wildlife commissioners, and I don't want to throw out names because I don't know if they want their names to be out in public, but there are individuals with resources that really want to see this fishery become right-sized because it's overcapitalized at the moment. There's just no doubt about it. 546 licenses out there is way too many. We need to get the number down to about 175 to 200 just to be on the level. It'd be great if we could get below that. But, you know, if people want to get involved, obviously join groups like Flatsworthy and CCA. You can donate to Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. Tell them you want it to go to the oyster buyback program, and they'll accept the money and put it into this fund. And then, you know, just help spread the word. That's the best thing. And we appreciate what you guys have been doing to help do that. Help educate your listeners and your friends, and let them know that this is going on, and try to participate in one of those ways.
Last thing, I don't want to shortchange some of the other great work that this money has been earmarked for. You know, you mentioned some of the beach restoration, some of the other educational even type things. What is that going to help do short term and long term for us?
Well, the one thing, the tagging stuff is really neat, especially the tarpon tagging stuff. You know, because we don't do a whole lot for the tarpon fishery except for just, you know, catch and release them. So we don't know a whole lot about their movements. We're learning more and more through the work of A&M Galveston and Hart Research Institute. So, you know, tagging these tarpon with some of these pop-up satellite tags and understanding their movements and migrations really can help make good scientific decisions for management of those species. So that's really interesting. And that's something that people will be able to go online and sort of watch and track how those fish are moving. The shoreline stabilization work that occurs in the bays that we mentioned earlier is extremely important. As anybody that fishes on the water knows, we're losing marsh, we're losing our wetlands. So anything that we can do to help reduce that erosion is going to be very beneficial to help support and protect the habitat. So really excited to see where those projects go. And I'll just say, I'll use this opportunity to ask individuals that are involved in habitat work through research institutes or other foundations or conservation organizations. If you have projects that are ongoing, or you have projects that you foresee and you have some funding gaps, please reach out to CCA, because we'd be looking to do more of this work in the future.
Awesome. Always educational, always great having you on, Shane. And this is not your last time that you're going to join us and help clarify some of these things, but appreciate it, man.
Thanks, John.